Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast. Welcome back, listeners. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, and today we are joined by Joon Ha Park, our junior correspondent, who will discuss a bunch of foreign relations related topics today. We're recording on Thursday, November 28th, a little bit over after 3 p.m. And let's start with the Ukraine envoy visit this week. That was one of the biggest news of the week, and it happened yesterday, I believe, on Wednesday.
Yes, it did.
Who was the Ukrainian envoys? The team. It was a team, right?
Yeah, it was a team. It was a delegation with the defense minister Umerov and a number of other economic and foreign ministry people.
Right, and who did they meet?
They met with President Yoon. They met with the National Security Advisor Shin Won-sik, not Chang Ho-jin, as Umerov kindly stated on his Facebook. And the defense minister Kim Yong-hyun for talks on developing the cooperation in response to Russia-North Korea cooperation.
So what was the level of release? What kind of detail or no detail came out after the meeting? We were waiting yesterday until late evening, and after seeing there was not that much of a detail, I decided to go for another topic for executive briefing.
Yeah, no, you were right to do so, as there was not much in the press release that was detailed, except for the fact that South Korea's President Yoon, the defense minister, and the national security advisor, they talked with the Ukrainian counterpart, saying that they were going to discuss bilateral cooperation, more going ahead forward. They're going to share more intelligence. Umerov briefed the South Korean president on the developments in Ukraine. Those details were not disclosed.
And it seems like they agreed to not disclose anything, right?
Indeed, yeah. We saw in previous meetings with the Ukrainian president that there were press briefings right afterwards by the National Security Office that were briefing the press on what actually happened during those meetings. However, at this time, it was just a press release, no press release from the defense ministry either, even though there was a 30-minute conversation between the Ukrainian delegation and the defense ministry.
Well, it was potentially big news, but reading between the lines of the level of release and the details and the background briefing contents, it looks like South Korea is being very cautious. If you look at the background briefing and some of the anonymized official comments last night, the South Korean official kept mentioning the U.S. They were saying, whatever we decide when it comes to weapons provision or whatnot for Ukraine, it will be done so within the broader framework of U.S.-South Korea alliance. How do you interpret what they actually mean by this?
Well, the incoming Trump administration is a big factor in this place. The Yoon administration will be very much anticipating how the Trump administration or Trump's camp view how to solve the Ukraine conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Right, and depending on which direction Trump goes, it could be either a big opportunity or a very big risk for South Korea, not just the government, but also defense companies here, right?
Indeed. So, we anticipated quite a lot beforehand, the meetings, media reports as well, saying that Ukraine would request a number of weapons and give South Korea
bring a wish list, right?
Bring a wish list. In a KBS interview on October 30th, I believe, President Zelensky, he said that he would provide the South Koreans with a wish list during the delegation's visit.
Right. And in that interview, he did mention a few weapon systems, right?
He did mention that Ukraine is much needing the air defense systems that South Korea has, the Cheonggung missile system.
And radar.
And the radar systems. And reports that came out from yesterday, most of them exclusives, as the government has not yet confirmed whether there was an actual wish list.
So grain of salt, but very interesting list. What's included?
Cheonggung, the MSAM missile system, radar systems, and also the 155 millimeter artillery shells.
Ooh, that's not
and
gonna
gunpowder.
happen.
Yes, yeah.
Well, okay, so it looks like there are some leaks or exclusives, but still a grain of salt because these are not confirmed by the government. I don't think they will until the Trump administration inaugurates, because that's if Trump goes down the road of really ending the Ukraine war within 24
As he's mentioned.
hours,
Yeah.
like he says, it really depends on how he will end it, right? Like, will he end it through like increased support for Ukraine, or will it be through just talking to Russia and then negotiating it?
Well, he has the team to go ahead with it. Mike Waltz, Kellogg, who was just appointed today, they've all voiced their support for Trump's policy and doctrine over the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So we still have to wait and see, but it's still
And
a
South Korean
very...
government has to probably wait and see.
Definitely. And I don't think that anything will be decided at this moment. I think we'll still have to wait for February and March to understand what the Trump administration's direction is.
February, March, because that's after the policy review?
After the policy review, and also after at least a month or two into his inauguration.
I see. All right, let's move on to the next topic. In terms of foreign relations, that was another major headline. Again, historical spat. But it seemed like there were some progress in the past few months, and then it sort of deteriorated all over again, despite the new Japanese Prime Minister inaugurating and starting his term in office. And what exactly happened here?
Yeah, so there was quite a diplomatic rift over South Korea, Japan holding a memorial service for Korean forced labor victims at Japan's Sado gold mine. And it kind of highlights the ongoing historical tensions that have continued to plague the South Korea-Japan relationships over the past few decades.
And that is despite Ishiba being the prime minister now, and he was considered from South Koreans' point of view more likely to engage with South Korea and a bit more apologetic, basically, right? But this happened anyways.
So as you mentioned, Ishiba was viewed quite considerably for his moderate views, or relatively moderate views from the Abe administration and also the Kishida administration on South Koreans' historical issues. However, this comes as a July agreement where Seoul supported Japan's UNESCO bid for the Sado gold mine in exchange for Tokyo acknowledging the forced labor history. However, the memorial service that was planned for last week, the Japanese representation that was decided 2 days before the event, Akiko Ikuina, was linked to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, which houses and enshrines Class A war criminals.
So that led to South Koreans not participating in the Japanese version of it.
Indeed. So South Korea boycotted the event. They held a separate event the next day.
Separate event?
Yes. They held a separate event the next day with the South Korean delegation, the South Korean first envoy to Japan, Park Cheol-hee. And they expressed an openness to keep talking to Japan based on these issues. But
well, blah, 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 right? Because it looks like it's already deteriorating quite a lot. But what's the political, how should people interpret the fact that they held these memorials separately? What was Japanese government's explanation?
Well, Japanese government's explanation was the fact that the individual in question, Ikuina, the Japanese representation who was accused of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, she only visited the Yasukuni Shrine before her term started.
So personal capacity.
Yes, personal capacity as her own force. But South Korea's boycott does not reflect that. And they said that they maintained respectful conversations with the South Koreans. However, both sides voiced quite considerable regret over the situation.
It sort of trickled into domestic politics spat again, because Japan relations, it's just really easy for the Democratic Party to chase, and they sort of went for this angle of this is all Yoon administration's fault for a diplomatic fallout. But I'm not sure if that's the most fair way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party is never really known for its fair representations of the Yoon administration. However, they went as far as saying that this is the worst diplomatic situation since liberation.
That's not true.
They did exaggerate quite a bit. However,
but they're making use of it.
Yes, and rightly so. I think domestic politics, they've always been quite critical of, and Yoon's opposition has been quite critical of Yoon's Japan policies, especially regarding the March 2023 forced labor deal that was made that required South Korean companies to pay the fallout instead of Japanese companies. So there's still a lot of historical grievances that do sort of sever the South Korea-Japan relationship.
Right, and this just points to, this week's development sort of points to how this is going to sort of continue for the next 2.5 years, like again, despite a different leadership in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to non-foreign relations topic, birth rate. It actually rebounded a little bit, very little, but still it rebounded. I think it was a first time it was third quarter birth rate that rebounded after more than a decade of slowdown. And the Yoon administration, it was anonymized official comments and like expert comments here and there in media articles. Some of them, like not all of them, some of them were citing, it's similar to how they responded when there was a spike in employment rate for the married woman a few weeks ago. They were saying maybe this is the result of the Yoon administration's family formation support policy. It's too early to tell, first of all, for it to immediately influence the third quarter birth rate because, giving birth takes around a year.
Indeed.
Technically. But more importantly, it looks like, in general, it's a positive development if this continues. But it's interesting how women in their 30s actually led this increase in the third quarter. I think the most plausible explanation to this is what the COSTAT official said yesterday, 2 days ago, which is during COVID-19, a lot of people sort of delayed their marriages because in South Korea, marriage is it starts with a performance, right? It starts with a proposal that you post on Instagram, usually, and sometimes it's more about the family sort of event rather than just you and your friends. You have to get like a huge wedding planning. You have to go to the wedding hall. You have to find a place you can host like 200 people so that you can sort of take back all the money you spent paying your congratulatory sort of money envelope sort of thing for other family. So it's like a family thing. So during COVID-19, the marriage rate sort of went down. So this could explain partly how this is rebounding because people are getting married now.
Sure.
And speaking of numbers, there was a big announcement this morning that a lot of people were waiting for a few weeks. Bank of Korea, the base rate, it actually, they cut it. It was a surprise because just a day before when there were financial and economic experts surveyed by media outlets. 83% said that they will probably freeze it, but they lowered it, citing reasons such as external trade risks that we are potentially looking at in the coming year because of Trump. Yeah, exactly. And also the domestic demand is very weak, so it looks like the Bank of Korea made a very, very difficult and probably unfavorable from their point of view sort of decision because lowering the base rate, it will lead to more household debt because people will start buying houses.
Right.
So it looks like a dangerous bet, but they still did it. But did you expect this, like the lowering of the base rate?
I mean, they've had quite a lot of pressure on shielding the economy. So it's something that the BOK will have been forced to do, regardless of the fact that it had reservations on the thing. I think the unexpectedness of the rate cut will extend to the rest of the week. However, I think that South Korea's economy will find a way.
Right. I mean, like from personal level, after the announcement, the BOK announcement, me and my friends in my group chat, we started talking about jeonse. Like, can we like start applying for more apartment lotteries, and should we look for like a different apartment with a lower jeonse, interest rate, the apartment renting? So this will lead to some sort of trickle effect. And also BOK not only cut its benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage points to 3%, they also lowered the GDP growth forecast, projecting 2.2% growth this year. And hear me out, 1.9% in 2025. This is very, very low. It's down from earlier estimates, which were like 2.5 and 2.2. It sort of aligns with what IMF was projecting about South Korea as well. It all really leads back to the Trump administration and all the external risks.
Indeed. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, which kind of explains the BOK's decision and also the government's standpoint. Whether they increase the sort of rhetoric towards the general public for them to understand, it's still something that needs to be seen.
Korea Pro, your definitive business intelligence resource for all things South Korea. Subscribe to our daily executive briefing on the most pressing issue of the day and a summary of key Korean and international news. Benefit from our analysts' original perspective on South Korea's economy, politics, security and society. The Monday Week Ahead newsletter helps you stay ahead of the curve for upcoming business and political events. Need to catch up? Our weekly podcast recaps recent developments. Trusted by leading corporations, government agencies and research institutions, Korea Pro delivers essential business intelligence daily. Stay ahead in South Korea's rapidly evolving environment. Visit koreapro.org/podcast. Korea Pro, never be sidelined again.
So moving on for the week ahead, the budget rate are set to be decided. They're set to complete the review by a deadline for next month on the 2nd of December. Park Chan-dae, the floor leader of the Democratic Party, he announced that he would make it his utmost that the negotiations are concluded by the deadline of December 2nd. However, sort of raised current concern that the government's plan could be submitted to the National Assembly's plenary session as it is without any negotiations going ahead.
And what was the PPP response so far?
Yeah, the PPP's response has been, we still have to wait and see what the PPP's Chu Kyung-ho responds, the floor leader, whether or not he engages in these negotiations to a fair degree with the Democratic Party, whether or not the negotiations are concluded by December 2nd. We still have to wait and see.
Right. And also, I mean, like in the past National Assemblies, in the past few years, if the DP floor leader 2 years ago said that we will do our best to conclude it by the deadline, I would have sure, because they probably wouldn't be able to negotiate. But right now, there is this general trend of the DP leader Lee Jae-myung going a bit more conservative sort of looking tone, like very pro-businessy, and Yoon and the People Power Party. So Yoon basically becoming a little bit more progressive when it comes to like economic and social policies. And PPP is sort of being in this awkward position. It's like, what's happening to our president? So there is a possibility that they will meet halfway before the deadline. So I would say that there is an increased possibility that they could actually negotiate before the deadline. And more about that, about Lee Jae-myung becoming more pro-business and Yoon Suk-yeol becoming more, pro-social welfare. Look out for my new analysis this week. And lastly, week ahead, it's not technically week ahead. We will have to wait a few months, probably weeks or months probably, but Ukraine, we will probably see more exclusives, more leaks about the wish list, whether or not that weapon system that we just mentioned are true, whether the government will confirm them or probably not. But it's something to keep an eye on.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lane. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.